Hello all, welcome. I'm William Brown, biophysicist with ARK Crystals. So we have a really great event for today. I'm going to be having a conversation with a longtime colleague of mine of our uh, research team, including Nassim Haramein and other physicists and biologists that we work with. That is Meredith Sands Keator.
Hi.
Hi, Meredith.
It's so good to be back with you again.
Thank you so much for joining in. We wanted to start off these series of conversations with you because you are one of the foremost practitioners utilizing this technology and one of the foremost practitioners who has developed a methodology, a modality for wellness, full holistic whole body wellness. So your depth of knowledge in this subject is unparalleled, is without peer, and you have just some brilliant insights into the ARK crystal technology itself as a colleague of ours who has been working with us on this technology and its applications, particularly for a long time now. So this, I think, is a great opportunity for all of us to really learn a lot about the ARC Crystal Tech as well as the methodologies that you've developed over several decades, the discoveries you've made in your own practice. And actually, Meredith, if you could speak a little bit to, your background in this uh, scientific practice of optimization of whole body optimization of wellness optimization
Yeah.
and your investigations into the science of wellness and even working with ARC crystals.
I'd love to. Thanks. It's always really fun having conversations with you. And I know that when I developed a program that began around the art crystals. And when I did that, I interviewed you so you're in the program because you're the one with the tech and the knowledge around crystals. And, um, and so I guess I'll start by explaining that I was trained originally. Well, first of all, I was raised in a family. This is my mother actually dancing. She was a very well-known dancer. And my grandfather, her father, was a herbalist and a massage therapist from Finland. And so there's always kind of been that holistic lean. There's medical doctors in the family, different kinds of things. So I was raised around that. And I started working in shiatsu and acupuncture when I was younger. And for 25 years, to make a longer story short, I've pioneered a whole field around a concept around fractal anatomy. And what's so interesting, because I understood it before I knew the word fractal. And this is so significant when we're talking about science today and where that meets biology and wellness. So I'll take time to kind of explain that a little bit. And yesterday I was in a 6 hour online presentation by Gil Headley, who's an amazing anatomist and dissector. And so he takes, and I've been through dissection programs before, but not for many years. And so I was in doing all that anatomy, and he was finding and calling it fractal anatomy through the body of what you're finding of a fractal being a pattern that repeats itself in larger scales. You know how the cerebellum, when you cut it, it looks exactly like a tree, but there's also all these little indentations so that you're getting, just like in our cell phones, this fractal kind of way of having embedding upon embedding to actually get, for instance, more intestine in your body or more brain in your head or more cell data into a small space. And so it was really interesting to watch how he was relating the body in relation to the environment and in relation to fractal anatomy. Now, I started using the term fractal anatomy, and I'm sorry if this sounds egotistical because I don't mean it, but if you Googled it online, there was nothing there. I mean, I tried, but it's like it was so clear to me that the body was fractal. But I take it to a different kind of way of thinking. in that regard. So there's practical fractal anatomy where, somebody like Gil can look at an aspect of what's going on physiologically and biologically in the body. And, like your bloodstream is like rivers, very, very typical things that we find in nature. And he's also really speaking in a way that the ancient Chinese always did around pattern thinking and how our environment really, the way that you would heal a person or that you would work with their health would be to understand the pattern of their body. And it can only be in relationship to its environment. So that's kind of a discussion in itself. But the point is that fractals and anatomy started to really blend in my work. And I spent 25 years really putting together what I call fractal anatomy and the geometry of healing, and or wellness, really. And so that's understanding, like, if you're there's this seemingly esoteric idea that your foot or your hand or your eye or your ear is a map of your whole body. And of course, in acupuncture, we needle the ear because it looks like an upside down embryo, and all of the parts of the body are mirrored in every part of the body. And what I began to understand through a lifetime of practice, largely in shiatsu, when I moved to California, my acupuncture license was not transferable. So I have the knowledge, but I just want to also clarify that I'm not actively needling professionally these days. Although I might work that out and do that again. But just to be clear, that I all of the understanding of acupuncture and the body and how to work gives us a greater understanding about what's fractal about the body. So I know I'm talking a lot, but I just want to kind of keep this thought going. So in the nature, is that okay?
Oh, it's fantastic, and I gotta mention though, that that's one of the reasons why, our collaboration has been so simpatico, is that the physics that we're developing, and my work involved with that in understanding the biology, the physics of the biology, is in the most general sense, it's called holofractal physics, a holofractal theory, which
Right.
brings together holographic and fractal. So the fact that you have a intrinsic or like an innate understanding that the body, the especially the anatomy is fractal, and also from your acupuncture practice holographic, because the reason why we say holographic is that one example of a hologram is that the information of the entire hologram, the whole image, that's where you get hologram, is
Right.
contained in every subunit.
Yeah.
Every pixel that makes up that hologram, they're actually voxels, three-dimensional pixels, contains the information of the whole. So, of course, if the body was holographic and fractal, holofractal, uh, the ear would contain actually an imprint, in a sense, of the entire human body. So you could
Yeah.
needle the ear and affect any part of the body. So it's just it's one of the reasons why I think our work, it just comes together so seamlessly and effortlessly.
Yeah. And it was your work that made me realize that I wasn't crazy for what I was seeing, because I didn't know anything about holographic anything in the world. I didn't know about fractals. I mean, I stumbled into it from working on bodies all the time. And then to continue that thought about the eye, the ear, the hand, or what have you, I begin, as I worked on the body more and more, I have kind of a calf fetish because I can feel people's calves and I can tell what's going on in the rest of the body because of what you're finding there. And I began to understand that it doesn't even make logical sense that if it's true that one part of the body can be a mirror of the whole body, it doesn't make any sense if it's just certain parts of the body. you know Not certain pixels would just be the ones that give you the full holographic picture of something. It would have to be all pixels doing that, and that's what physics shows us. So why would it be any different from the body? And that's what I got fascinated by and started to coin this term fractal anatomy that is now easily Googleable. And I was thrilled to hear an anatomist who's so great at his craft to really understand just all of the images that there are in the body that are completely connected to nature, which is what the ancient Chinese and Indians have been saying for, millennia.
And one of the reasons why that is actually such a significant insight is that what does it mean for the body to be fractal? What connection does that have to the larger dynamics of our world, especially in terms of like physics? One of the reasons why that fractal anatomy is so significant is that one of the key properties of a fractal is you had mentioned it is this what's called scale invariant complexity that a pattern repeats across scale.
Yeah. In different.
Uh,
Mm.
so, like the same kind of pattern that you get with the example you had used, the cerebellum, the cerebral cortex, rather. Uh, the same kind of dendritic arborization pattern that you see with the neurons that comprise the cerebral cortex. You can actually see that pattern repeating down to the molecular level,
Wow.
at the subcellular level within the neuron. You have the same kind of branching dendritic type arborization pattern with the microtubules. That's commonly called the cytoskeleton of the cell. You have the pattern repeats, and so you get this repeating across a scale, and
Yeah.
actually, it is thought that at the fundamental most scale, what's called the Planck scale, you have a similarly multiply connected type pattern of essentially filaments coming out from nodes, a neuronal pattern at the substructure of space-time. And then if you go to the largest scale, the cosmic web, you have a dendritic arborization pattern of super galaxy clusters. And actually, they've done quantitative assessments of that. Um, Two Italian astrophysicists uh, had done this quantitative assessment, and the fractal architecture of the cosmic web, that's the universe at the largest scale, is almost like a one-to-one match to the brain, the architecture of the brain, the same kind of neuronal patterning.
Yeah, it's
S-
beautiful.
And so the what's so significant about this, the reason why that's it's important, why it's significant, is that what that means is that there's information or signals that are being transduced to the smallest scale, the Planck structure, substructure of space-time, to the largest scale, the cosmic web structure of the universe itself. And so, that
How can your
is,
body not be in the midst of that?
uh, uh, it actually is almost positioned nearly exactly at the juxtaposition between that small scale and the larger scale,
Is it
because
really?
there's
That's
10.
right, because Nissim points that out in his talk. I'd forgotten.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because there's 10 to the 30 orders of magnitude up to the largest scale structure, that cosmic web structure, 10 to the 30 order two's magnitude going down in scale to the Planck scale. We're right at the equiposition between those 2 points, kind of like a fractal antenna transducing the
Wow.
information across it. But that though is the physical significance of it is that that fractal architecture is a physical mechanism by which there is connectivity between the micro and the macro. And
Right.
we're right in the middle of that connection, that connectivity.
Right. And that micro and macro is, you know, that's ancient philosophies and medicines too. So, in layperson's terms, would you say that because a fractal is a pattern that repeats itself, so just like Russian dolls that, you know, smaller, larger, larger, larger. When you're talking about these, my cat is insistent on coming in.
Well, I'm sure everybody would love to have the
The
cat
cat
join in.
wants in on the conversation. So, on layperson's terms, would you say that it's a particular fractal pattern that goes from the Planck length all the way up to the cosmos. And you're when Nassim, for instance, or you're talking about when you're talking about the different fractal layers that are going up from the micro to the macro, it's the same fractal pattern of something that's moving all the way up. And then you find the human in the midst of that. What does that mean to have the human in the middle point there? Like, what is the fractal pattern that then you're looking at that and saying, ah, and this is where humans are?
Well, the significance of it can really get into some mind-bending areas. You,
Well,
and
for
you
sure
know,
the significance, but what's the fractal pattern that you can say, here's where human is? Do you know what I mean? Like what is the common thread going through this fractal scalar thing? I mean, you can hear, for instance, Nassim Haramein talking for like 6 hours about it, and I get it when I'm in there, but now when I'm thinking just in really practical layperson's terms, what is it in the human that is placed in the middle of that scale? What is the common pattern? I think that's what
very specifically, the actual like geometric midpoint between 10 to the 35 um meters. That's the Hubble radius of the universe.
see, but
And
those are words that I don't understand. So I just want
okay,
to, I just
okay.
want, I want
Well,
to just see if
10 to
like how is the way to make it like most.
well, the literal midpoint between the larger scale and the small scale, the micro and the macro, is actually the microtubule size. And so actually, if you were talking about what is the specific geometry, it would be the geometry of the microtubule.
And so describe the microtubule and what that is.
So, because this is probably going to recur a couple of times at least
Yeah.
in our discussion, because a lot of the biophysics that we're investigating right now is centered around the microtubule. We're also very interested in other things, the plasma membrane, mitochondria, but the microtubule is just a very salient part of this consideration.
Mhm.
But so the microtubule, it's a protein uh, within the cell. So you have what's called a tubulin protein, which would kind of just look like a kidney si shaped globular protein.
Mhm.
But one of the things that this protein does, the tubulin protein, is that it connects together, forming tubulin dimers. That's two tubulins connected together. These come together to form what are called tubulin protofilaments. And what it does is it assembles this crystalline structure within the cell called the microtubule.
And then we're back to crystals again, which is
Back to
what
crystals.
fascinated me because I just always felt that they were just very like woo woo new agey kinds of things until I started talking to you. So please continue.
Because it's not well understood, certainly not discussed, like as from biologists, molecular biologists, that the heart of the cell are crystals. The heart of the cell is crystals, like the microtubule crystalline structure. And one of the reasons why it's so significant that this is a crystal, some of our colleagues like Anirban Bandyopadhyay, he's called it a one-dimensional crystal. Uh, Basically, just he's done actual quantitative modeling of how that crystalline architecture of the microtubule enables it to be a information receiver or transceiver, to receive and transmit signals within the cell, information within the cell. But so these tubulin subunits form these protofilaments. You get 13 protofilaments that come together and form essentially a tube, a cylinder, and that is the microtubule. Uh, within the what's called luminal space, the inner space of that cylinder, it's filled with, again, what Anirban Pandyopadhyay has measured and quantified as atomically ordered water, that is liquid crystalline water. Uh, so, so, so actually, the crystal and crystalline structure, it keeps repeating when discussing the physiology, the relevant physiology of the microtubule, which forms these long filaments that one of the functions of is to provide support and rigidity to the cell and motility to certain cells that move around. Not all cells do. For that reason, it's a primary component of what's called the cytoskeleton.
Mhm.
There's other filamentary structures, intermediate filaments, actin filaments, which are very important as well. But the microtubule is one of the primary constituents of what's called the cytoskeleton. But as I mentioned, it's not just like a rigid, immobilized skeleton structure. It's a dynamic crystal because it's also involved in motility. In fact, some of the most important motility, the microtubule is essential for uh, chromosomal segregation. That is, uh, bundling after the genome at the center of the cell in the nucleus, after the genome has been duplicated, the microtubules are responsible for making sure that they're bundled so that when the
I
cell
can see that.
divides,
It's like I can see what you're meaning,
uh,
as if it was physiology class, like what pictures
uh,
that I've seen. Would it be too much to say um that, because I don't want to degrade the depth of the science involved. I like taking large concepts and making them make sense without actually, denigrating the importance of the work. Would you say, if there was a common theme, if microtubules are the thing that put humans in the middle between the little bits and the big bits, um, would it be too simple to say that it's crystalline structure that is what's moving in a scalar way from the small to the large, and that that's what kind of the centrifugal theme is, or is that too simple?
yeah, there could be some issues with characterizing it like that.
Yeah. Because I'm just trying
Um,
to get like the idea of, I mean, when Nissim Harriman gives a talk, there's just so much, and it's like a magic carpet, and you go through the whole
ah,
thing, it all kind of like makes sense, and you're like, oh
yeah.
my God, at the end. And then when I have questions like this, like and if Nissim were ever hearing this, he'd probably be hitting his head going, you've heard the talk so many times. But I'm just trying to have it make sense from a more simplified point of view of what are I understand scalar, different scales, a pattern repeating itself over different scales.
Well,
I'm
well,
just
because one of the things is that it's a dynamic crystal.
right.
So in a certain sense, you can characterize the other intervals of this repeating pattern as crystalline forms, especially when you're going down the scale towards the Planck scale.
Right.
But again, these things are actually so dynamic that I wouldn't pin that is one of the primary characterizations for it. Uh, One of the most significant aspects of the geometry, the pattern itself, is this multiply connected type patterning, which is in most like simplistic terms, often that you have a nodal point, a node, with fibrils. You can almost think of it as like electrical lines, or fiber optic cables.
Right.
Just kind of speaking metaphorically a little bit
Or
here.
nerves that
Yeah,
you
or
know from a
nerves,
node.
the axonal neuron, yeah,
Yeah.
coming out from the nodal point. So microtubules,
I just want to say
yeah,
one thing while you're saying that. In the anatomy class yesterday, he lifted up the a whole section of bowel, like how the kind of the mesentery runs, and there was just totally a nodal point, and then everything just spanned out like that.
Ah,
So it just reminded me of that.
yeah, yeah. Well,
So,
and a lot of the nerve centers, they ganglion plexus, um, they have that kind of they're a nodal point, and they kind of have like this even stellar arborization, dendritic type neuronal type pattern emanating from them, and yeah, so the fractal anatomy is extremely interesting. Uh, but so the microtubule will form this same kind of patterning, a neuronal type patterning. Like you can see it in terms of its interaction with regulating the genome, the core central information of the living system.
right.
Because you have these things called centrioles, which form this like nucleation point next to the nucleus, and then the nodal point, and the microtubules radiate out from that nodal point, and basically they connect the nucleus to the cellular membrane. So again, this idea of connectivity, that's one of the main things of this pattern that's repeating. So the microtubules are, interestingly enough, right at the midpoint between the largest scale structures in the universe and the small scale structure. Not that existence ends at this largest scale and smallest scale. It's the largest and smallest scale for our from our purview.
Hmm.
Uh, it's actually an infinite structure, but from our purview, we couldn't actually ever measure within the confines of the speed of light outside of the largest scale or below it. Uh, you could potentially do it via faster than light communication, measure beyond it. But uh,
That kind of reminds me of the electromagnetic spectrum, that we've got sight just kind of in the middle of it, and we've got the alpha rays and the gamma rays, and then they say it's infinite, but this is how much we get, and this is what's making all of our technology work, and it's always like it's a line with lines between it, which is such a mental left brain way to look at something when it's actually very dynamic. So I'm hearing similarities as you're speaking.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's actually a good analogy for a number of different reasons, but certainly because the electromagnetic spectrum is thought to go infinitely large wavelengths, infinitely small wavelengths.
Mhm.
Uh, Interestingly, where you would have a cutoff is a wavelength, an electromagnetic wavelength, the size of the universe, the diameter of the universe. That would
Right.
be a resonant standing wave in the universe, uh, or a wavelength the size of the Planck length. And actually, in Nassim's latest paper, they do show analytically that that is the cutoff for electromagnetic radiation. The smallest wavelength is the Planck wavelength.
Okay.
Again, it does go smaller than that, but from our purview,
Yeah.
our scale, uh,
The
at
box that we need to look at things in for
y-
for the
y-
purposes of these
y-
dimensional spaces.
any wavelength smaller than that actually looks like a black hole, to us smaller than the Planck length.
I love your
And
chuckle on that. You're like,
well,
oh,
it's
it looks
kind of
like a black hole. Hmm.
it's kind of interesting because if you go along that electromagnetic spectrum down to the smallest wavelength, eventually you'll see a black hole. If you go up the wavelength, eventually you'll see a black hole, the event horizon of the universe.
Right.
So
Well,
kind of
what's so
interesting.
interesting about that is that, and in like even in acupuncture, when they've done electrical testing on the skin, and there's an area everywhere where the acupuncture points are, the electrical conduction, I don't know exactly, but it's lower than all the other points. And so they're like little portals. And a lot of times when I've needled, I've seen this spiral start to move right around the needle. It's really
Oh,
interesting.
wow.
It'll
Yeah.
like move and kind of trigger around. So when can I share a little bit about the ARK crystal and what I did in relation to acupuncture points?
That would be great. Yeah.
Because it was so when we were in Egypt, with the resident science, with Nassim and team, I was saying to Sarah, to the CEO, it'd be really good because, we were all wearing our crystals, and we would all, and it's every time you do a trip with Nassim, you do the crystals and you all have hands, and we kind of do a meditation with it. I had suggested that it would be a really interesting idea because there's the water bottle and then there's wearing it and meditating with it, that there's all these acupuncture points on the body, and that wouldn't it be interesting to create a program like that? And they were like, yeah, do that. Let's create, something where we can expand a little bit more what the ARK crystal can do. So I created, um, well, I'll explain what I created later, because what started to happen was I started to question more about crystals, because I was like, isn't that new age? But you've got the science. So what's the science? So I interviewed you for that part, as I was saying, to really understand the fascination that we're actually, I think what blew me away the most was you were talking about how we're swimming in a crystalline plasma. And the concept of crystal is so different from the crystal that you can have, in your hand, to crystalline plasma. There's a lot to understand on a physics side that I don't entirely grasp. And what was important to me was finding the science underneath it. Now I know that there's been a lot of science around the ARK crystal, and I'd love for you to speak to that again, as well. What I ended up doing was, as I got more into the program, and the creative process is so interesting because if you just follow the thread, then it creates its own thing. Like I love how Michelangelo used to just look at a block of marble, and if he could see the thing inside of it, he would free it with his chisel. And it was the idea that there's this creative process there, and you just need to sort of listen and watch how it creates itself. So it began to be, to me, um, not just using the ARK crystal, but what are the other ways that we know about the body now that people don't generally know? And how can we use those things to actually enhance our own well-being? And and so it started to turn into wanting to share with people the understanding about fractals and what they mean in the body, meridians, and because from chakras from the east, meridians are kind of the next thing to come through. And of course, in acupuncture, that's the whole basis upon which we're working. And also tensegrity, which is Buckminster Fuller's concept, but that's geometric and geodesic domes, and the jitterbug that goes in and out. But this is exactly what's in the body, is how the pulling of the muscle and the pushings of the bones, kind of, as Kenneth Snelson called it, gives you like a way that everything gets held together. There's tension lines and holdings. And I've seen some of the structures that Kenneth Snelson, who's now passed on, unfortunately, created, called like the needle. And it's exactly what I've seen in the body, including the kinds of geometries that the physics that you guys do are exactly what I ended up seeing in the body as well. And that's what made me realize I wasn't just crazy, because I was working on bodies and getting different kinds of responses, and taking the fractal level to a more, to not just the physical, but the energetic template of where east and west meet. And so in the program, which I call Fractal Frequencies, Creating a Powerful Daily Practice, it became really important to me that we have the luxury of being able to find time to meditate or do things like that. And maybe people laugh when they say that, because they're like, girlfriend, maybe you got time, but I don't have time. And I get that. But with all the wars, with all the chaos going on, we create so much chaos outside of ourselves. And so I think we really have, it became so clear to me that what I care about the most, I think, out of all the variations of how I present this work, is the idea that we have it's a fundamental activism to learn to work with these temples as the scientific laboratories that they are, And we know that frequency is part of what's running us. Like we have to move out of this idea of what people have called spirituality and move it into the science that hasn't really been discovered yet. And I know that that's something that you and I kind of enjoy speaking about, which I'd love to ask you some more about that too. So the program is really focused on giving people a different view of aspects of their body, not just muscles and nerves and dermatomes and the basic things we're taught about the body, but what about tensegrity and what are the geodesic domes that what does that have to do with how the body is held together and what how do meridians or the concept of fractals fit in? And I have one party trick actually in my work, which is, and I'm starting to write a book on tattoos, which seems so random and out there as a whole different thing. But the more and more I worked on people and the more people got tattoos, the more it started to make sense of, oh, of course you would have that there. And of course the symbol would be significant, but the location was really significant. So understanding acupuncture points and understanding that on a fractal level became helpful. So I'll give you an example of how so a dear friend of mine had passed away a number of years ago from having a melanoma on his abdomen. And I go into this in a little bit more detail in that talk that I gave in 2019 for the Resonant Science Foundation. So I won't go into a lot of it, but just to say that I found an area on his calf that very much pertained to what was going on in his abdomen and down in his hip when you kind of understand the body from these different beautiful ways we can now start to see the body. And I told him that it felt like metastasis to me. The muscle wasn't a normal pliable muscle. And he thought it was just a tight muscle. And I don't want anyone to think just because they have tight muscles that they have cancer, because that's not what I'm saying. It's a particular thing. It's a particular way and an ability that I have to read in that way. He went to the doctor. They biopsied it. It was metastasis, and so it gave them a good few weeks heads up that it was there because his foot eventually dropped, and they would have found it after a few weeks. But this is what I'm talking about, the idea of being able to see kind of the way the East and the West meet. So I share some of that in the program to give people this different lens. And then I use the ARK crystal as ways to understand and stimulate these lower electrical spaces that we call acupuncture points and learn a little bit about what they can do and self-help ways of working with that. Um, and it's also other forms of other things, other techniques. I grew up in a world of somatic stretch. That's a family lineage I carry. So I use these concepts of how to understand the fractal nature of the body to unlock tensions. But where I've taken it to an energetic level is different. And I think that that seems out of the box of science because we don't know quantitatively what that energy system is in the body. But I see a particular geometry in the body, which I know you and I have talked about a lot. And this is the shape of it. And it's got, some very well-known shapes. And yet this was um, a sensory experience for me. And then when I finally, after years of feeling, it was just intersection points. It was particular areas on the body inside where the Chinese say all illnesses or all problems arise from the hara, which means the interior and all of your organ systems. And as I began to feel and I was so confused for so long because I didn't get why I was feeling things in certain areas. And it wasn't strictly acupuncture and it wasn't strictly meridians and it wasn't strictly muscles and nerves and all these different kinds of ways of working. And then eventually, after many years, it was like, oh, there's like angles. It's like sunlight that comes in to hit a certain point. And if you
Well,
understand,
and tensegrity structures there as well with
yeah,
the angles that you were looking at.
yeah,
They have like a tension type property to them.
and that's how
Is
the
that
body
correct?
functions.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh,
And
yeah.
so that's where there's the physical aspect of tensegrity of
Uh,
how what did Snelson call it? The pushing of the bones and the pulling of the muscles. There's got to be a tensegrity kind of hold through there to keep everything together. What I've seen is that I mean you can't have something exist without the energetic underneath it in the first place. And so I see the same pattern in the energy system, which gives me certain points in the body that instead of working on the shoulder or working on the neck, I'm thinking into basically the nodal point. And there's also connections to the different plexuses in the body. So there's a lot in there. And I give people, that's what I teach bodywork therapists, how to really work in that way more specifically. But to give people a program where we could learn more about the science of crystals, because I wanted to know what was scientific about it. I too have this idea that crystals are woo woo and, you know, they go a lot. So I really have appreciated the journey of understanding the science with that. And I wanted to create a program that inspired people to do a daily practice, but find a way that they liked doing the practice. You don't have to have an ARK crystal. You don't have to have a crystal. You can work with breath work. You can work with stretch. You can work with all these different ways and understand the body from through a different lens that really opens up the inner mind.
Well,
So, yeah.
and it's really interesting because I see a lot of parallels between even some of the Eastern type practices that have contributed to the development of your highly effective program like acupuncture, where, from the Western scientific perspective, when acupuncture first came into the conversation, it was like woohoo stuff, right? It was like, they're talking about yin yang energy and chi energy, and to the proper logical scientific mind, these things were not real.
It'll
They
be
were
so cool when we
illusionary.
actually quantify things beyond the electromagnetic spectrum and we start
Uh,
getting biology, when we start to notice that the yin and yang that they're talking about are the states of duality, but it's also just polarization of positive to negative.
well,
And
and that's electrical charge.
exactly.
So it's like uh the flow of energy through the meridians. That is the flow of bioelectricity
That's right.
through the conduits of the body. And you have you can measure very specific conduits of bioelectrical flux through the body. Just if anybody is questioning that, just look at the work of Dr. Mike Levin,
Mhm.
who is developing programs for bioregenesis based on the bioelectrical currents of the body.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's so much. I was just reading a book called Infinite Mind by Dr. Valerie Hunt. There's a lot of people that have done a lot of research on the field, on
mhm.
understanding what we're working with. I found it very surprising as I started to look into it that it's not more commonly known in the general public. Yeah.
Well, and so you had even mentioned how some of the acupuncture points, you said, I believe you saw a drop in voltage,
Not that I saw it, but that science has
has
determined,
measured that.
yeah, that when they're
Yeah.
looking at acupuncture points, what I found interesting in dissection years ago when I did that was if I and my father donated his body to anatomy, so to me it was a very sacred thing to go into the room and work with bodies in that way. And it took me years actually to feel comfortable doing it because my father had donated his body. But when I if I could get in there before my colleagues got in there and messed up muscle, I could actually feel and read a dead formaldehyde body in the same way that I could read a live one. Because when you put formaldehyde into a body, it's kind of like it freezes the river, and or it's a
Interesting.
fried egg rather than a raw egg. And so I could feel it's like looking at a river, and if the water's gone, you can still read how the river flowed because of the banks of the river. So
Mhm.
I would literally run my finger along. I remember one of them was like liver 8. It's a neuromuscular junction just in the lower thigh, and I could completely feel that dip in there and exactly what it was. And I actually, in another program my main program that I wrote, I ended up writing a whole piece around that incredible experience, which I won't go into, but it actually showed me that this inner world that I was working with was real and existed. And I want to actually just jump over all that for a quick second, because I want to say that what's so interesting and the primary part of all of that research around this idea of Western sciences and Eastern medical sciences coming together is that what I feel the common link between the two is fractals. And now this is what Nassim Haramein, for instance, there are many physicists who are looking at, obviously, it's the holy grail to know what the unified field is in, how all the big bits of planets and all the little bits of quarks and leptons fit together is kind of the holy grail where we get into the technological levels that I'd love for you to speak on. Actually, Eastern and Western medicine are doing the same thing. In the world of physics, it appears that fractals, understanding and viewing through a lens of fractals, which would be gone through complexity theory to chaos theory, and then understanding fractals is what's linking the theory of relativity with the quantum world. And what I'm seeing is that between Western medicine and Eastern medical theories, if we look through a lens of fractals and geometry, suddenly it's just one piece together. It makes so much sense. And that to me is the main contribution to the conversation in my life's work that I feel that I have put forth in that. So that's more an intellectual way of understanding it. I find it very exciting that fractals brings us in science and technology the same thing in medicine and biology. And so that is the primary thing that I think is so powerful, because when the unified field theory changes, our technology changes everything when it's really solved. And the same thing with Eastern and Western medicine. We'd start to be able to be like Star Trek and just read the body. And so
Well,
I'm
and fractals really are how the unified field is unified,
brilliant.
because in part via what I had mentioned about how important fractals are in connecting across scale. Uh, Certainly, in even when you're talking about like a neuronal dendritic type pattern connecting spatially, but then also connecting across scale. That's how the field is connected from the smallest scale, the Planck structure, to the largest scale, the cosmological structure, is forming a unified field. You know, but part of that is via the fractal structure, the fractal architecture.
And that's exactly what I found between Western and Eastern medicine. And I
Mhm.
didn't know what a fractal was. And then I saw 8 hours of Nassim Haramein's tapes. And he got to the end where he pulled the same geometries out. And I was like, oh my God, that's the same thing. And then years later, it's kind of come to where we can really see much more clearly the connection between the two. But
Well,
it's the same
there's
pattern. It's the same
uh,
pattern in science, the small to the large and east to west. It's this fractal nature as soon as you see pattern. And that's how the ancient Chinese always worked with wellness in the body, because they were seeing the patterns and how things ran, and we're not in any way taking the human body out of that. So, and I'll stop there because that's too much of a discussion, but
well, and what we're getting close to the 1 hour mark. So
yeah, that was
there,
fun.
but there's a point that I'd like to go back to that you had brought up, and that is uh, the science of crystals.
Yeah.
Because you had mentioned that you had started utilizing the ARK crystal in some of your practice, and had have developed actually a whole program that utilizes the ARK
Well,
crystal.
so the program is the one that I discussed, where it's really focused on getting people to create a daily practice. And one of the ways that you can do that for those who have either a crystal they want to work with or the ARK crystal specifically is to use certain points on the body. So it's
Yeah.
doing three things. It's using the science that's underneath the ARK crystal itself, which you speak to.
Uh,
And that represents a lot of science underneath it. And so it's something that's tapped into the 0 point field. So it's using a particular kind of science to use points on the body that are known scientifically to, well, slowly now scientifically for thousands of years, that have been used to do certain things. And then also using the mind's focus, which is a really important part of it. So we can, plot things on, but it's really looking at where the mind is focused. And I think these other ways of understanding meridians and fractals and tensegrity about the body really help give us more of an inner vision. And when I feel a connection to something, because I'm connecting beyond the immediate area, there's definitely much more bang for your buck in tension release patterns and different things that are going on. So I use the ARK crystal specifically in that program to show different ways that people can use by understanding certain points. And then, of course, I have workshops where people, retreats where people can come and we can do a deeper dive in different ways in that. But
And those points are they do correspond with the meridian points of
yeah, they're all
acupuncture. Yeah.
acupuncture points.
Well, see, because this is really interesting because so in terms of the flow of electrical current, we can call it bioelectricity. Electricity is electricity, whether it's in the biological system or outside.
Right.
But let's just stick with the terminology of bioelectrical currents. Uh, so it's been established that many of the meridians, the acupuncture points, uh, correspond with the conduits of uh, conduction of the bioelectrical currents. There's Dr. Maywan Ho, the late Dr. Maywan Ho was a particular researcher who had um, written a paper specifically on how the meridian system and acupuncture points do directly correspond with many of the physically identifiable conduits for conduction of bioelectricity through the body.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, what I believe certainly is being discussed when was talking about yin yang energy and chi energy is bioelectrical energy. And so at these acupuncture points where you found the ARK crystal has some of the greatest utility, uh, that is where you can, in a sense, tap into and connect with those bioelectrical currents. Uh, See, this is where it gets interesting in terms of the science of the ARK crystal, and that the ARK crystal is a piezoelectric crystal.
Right.
That's actually one of the reasons why the ARK crystal is one of the most the crystal that we use to make the ARK crystal, quartz crystal, is one of the most widely utilized crystals for technological applications because of this piezoelectric property of quartz crystal.
Hmm.
So,
Do
uh,
you want to explain for people what that means?
yeah, another really good technical term for piezoelectric is electromechanical behavior.
Right.
Electrical and mechanical, that is, so electrical is electrical currents, and mechanical or acoustic behavior is vibrations, actual physical oscillations of a material. That's sound, hence acoustic vibrations. Um, but also in terms of quartz crystal, it is the actual displacement or oscillatory behavior of the crystalline lattice.
Hmm.
And so the piezoelectric effect or electromechanical property of quartz is that when there is a acoustic oscillation, that is vibration of the crystalline lattice of quartz, it generates an electrical current.
Hmm.
And so, uh,
Like in your
conversely,
watch, but different.
you said in your watch?
In your watch, like the little quartz crystal that it's
Yeah,
just putting energy through it, and then it beats at such regularity that you can tell the time by it.
well, because it works conversely as well. If you pass an electrical current through quartz, it oscillates, it vibrates,
Right.
and so actually it vibrates at such a specific inerrant frequency that you can run a clock on this frequency of its vibration.
Yeah.
Actually, the heart of an atomic clock, our most precise time measurement capabilities, is a quartz crystal.
Mhm.
It's just that it is periodically synced with the radiation of an atomic isotope, radioactive isotope, so that it is even more precise. But it's still actually a quartz crystal is at the heart of an atomic clock as well. But so uh, the ARK crystal. has been treated in such a way. We have what's called an electromagnetic resonance generator, the harmonic flux resonator, a device thought of and constructed by Nassim and the research team he directs. But this electromagnetic resonance generator is able to couple with the ARK crystal so that it establishes a constitutive activation of that oscillatory behavior of the quartz crystal so that it has a continuous, albeit minute, electrical current running through it. So, uh, in terms of the bioelectrical currents of the body, uh, it is able to directly interact with those electrical conductances because it is a electrical conductive device, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, uh, is there a science behind how you can utilize the ARK crystal to modulate these acupuncture points, the meridians? There is. It's generating a coherently structured electromagnetic field, an electrical current that can modulate the flow of the bioelectrical currents. So,
Yeah.
just going back to that idea that, it might seem esoteric because it's a crystal and these have generally been utilized without a strong understanding of their technological properties, like some are electromechanical, have electromechanical behaviors like quartz. But nevertheless, there is actually a very specific science behind how these devices can function and interface and benefit the well-being of the body.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find it to be a really fascinating journey. So I'm really building community around that, around people who really want to develop a practice that I call it the 5 minute promise. Just do 5 minutes because it's really quite amazing when we can get ourselves into. I've actually been getting up in the morning and doing these kind of epic morning practices, getting up early enough so I can fit it into my day because it starts to be something that you don't want just 5 minutes. You want a bunch of it because you kind of go into no space and no time. So whether you're, however people like to work with their bodies and however they want to explore this mind and the fields that we live in, it's so satisfying and so creating community around that too. I know that in February I'll be taking the community through the whole program, just to keep inspiration. And then beyond that, I'm trying to continually find ways to not just have another thing or another text that people are trying to keep up with, but I'm not the only person who's getting the memo in the wellness field of how health really obviously is our most important wealth, but that we can also, there's a lot of people like Joe Dispenza and Lynn McTaggart and um, everyone in Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden, all these people that are bringing the science around it, the idea too, where we need to be doing some sort of daily practice. We need to take responsibility for the fact that we're in living laboratories and my nervous system is talking to your nervous system, talking about itself. And that's like a big acid trip that we haven't even begun to like unwind yet. And to really take, if we have the time and the space that we're not in a war zone, we're not in a fire zone, we're not in a place, it's really important to ground our own resonance, and as the Buddhists have always called sharing metta, letting that move out into the, I mean, if we know that if everybody were meditating like the Dalai Lama, the world would be a very different place if everybody grounded. So I feel like I got the same memo when I was creating this program. It started with ARK Crystals and then it moved into these other ways, that I just feel that community around this idea is really important. And I am so grateful for the work that you and ISF have done in relation to um, really bringing together these worlds that some people call spirituality. That's really just science. That's just there waiting, and there's actually so much information already. And without even understanding it intellectually, we can tap into it energetically, and that is not a woo-woo term anymore either. So
Mhm.
I'm just really, I know we're at our end of our hour, but I just really want to thank you for not only the talk, but for all the work that you do and how much I get to learn from you because I've learned
Well,
a lot from you.
Well, the sentiment is mutual. Thank you as well. It's just one of the reasons why we are such good partners. The ISF, Nasim, our research team, and with the work that you do, is that there is a similar, simpatico understanding of the significance of this kind of research into the science of how we can boost and realize the optimized self.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's not
uh,
just technology, it's not just where the technology is going, it's also where we're going
mm,
and where medicine is going. We can see into kind of the future of that. And I said to Nassim years ago, and I'll say to you, you know, if you guys hadn't done that work, I would be sure that I was mentally insane because what I was seeing and feeling was so specific and I was so alone in the process. um, I relate a lot when Nissim talks about being in his van by himself trying to work out these things. I feel like I was in that same kind of incubation period where there was nobody relating to what I was talking to. And there comes a certain time when, if you start seeing and feeling things that no one else is relating to, you think that you're the problem. And so the work that you guys have done made me realize, oh, no, it's just the same thing. It's pattern, it's seeing the same pattern. So, on behalf of my mental sanity as well, I want to thank you
thank you.
for keeping me real.
Well, and is there where can people go to access your program?
Yeah, all of my work is on
Okay.
geometryofhealing.com. And also, I believe there's also a link for you guys to send out that will link directly to the specific program I'm talking about, which is Fractal Frequencies, Creating a Powerful Daily Practice. And that's what I'm also building community with no financial requirement, just to kind of keep everyone inspired in that. And then my other two signature programs that are on my website are my big opus of work that I was talking about that took me 25 years, called Fractal Anatomy and the Geometry of Healing. And then Meridian Mastery, which is a very deep, in-depth dive around meridians, because a lot of people are kind of throwing the term around. And this gives you a really solid base. And also, there's a whole section that you can take to acupuncture college if you were going to acupuncture school. So there's a lot there from the layperson all the way up to the professional practitioner.
Well, and because I know since I've done a discussion with you that there's also additional kind of detailed information of some of the things that we've discussed today
Yeah.
available on your website. So definitely, if uh, people are interested in learning more, there's a lot of great.
Or
Uh,
come stretch too, because every
uh,
week, pretty much every week, when I'm in one place anyway, I teach somatic stretch and I talk about, so that's the family lineage of work. So for an hour, we just get together and you learn about what's fractal about your body and how you can unlock tension and pain syndrome. So it's a very practical way for people to not maybe get all the mental information, but just want a direct experience. So there's a lot available on that site, and thanks for mentioning it.
yeah. Well, and if you're looking for new exciting ways to work with your ARK Crystal,
Yeah.
it's also a great place to learn more about ways that you can
Yeah.
work with the ARK Crystal with your body.
Yeah.
Uh,
There's
we'll
lots
definitely
of so many
provide those
different ways of
links.
looking at the body so that you can
Mhm.
really get an inner vision, and that helps you use whatever tool or even your mind or fingers to understand and how to work with that. But of course, if you put the art crystal with it too and all the science with that, then we're talking about resonant fields communicating with each other too.
Well, thank you so much, Meredith. It's been
Excellent.
a
It's
joy
always so fun
getting
talking with you.
to discuss this with you. I always thoroughly enjoy it, our
Me-
discussions.
Yeah, for sure. Until next
Mm.
time, thanks so
Until next
much.
time.
I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.